Hello wrestling fans, I am the ProWrestleMachine. And this is June 17, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Brian Pillman future after Humvee accident. Ilio Di Paolo bio. WCW and WWF big gates over the weekend. Tons more. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. June 17, 1996. The latest chapter of The Truth is Stranger Than Fiction and Truth Sometimes Is Fiction saga of Brian Pillman came on June 7 when he signed a 3-year contract with the World Wrestling Federation. Pillman's contract with World Championship Wrestling expired on April 17, 2 days after suffering a Humvee, open-air military vehicle, wrecked near his home in Cincinnati. Pillman had been negotiating with both WWF and WCW in the interim, going back and forth between the sides. The belief was that WCW had the upper hand because Pillman had a large family and the WWF's traditional non-guaranteed contracts made leaving WCW because of the family too large of a financial risk. Pillman continued his quest to become a one-man manipulation machine by continually getting stories out everywhere that he was close to signing or leaning toward signing with WWF, largely to up his price to WCW, since Eric Bischoff in this wartime period didn't want to lose a key piece of talent to his opposition after the whole Mark Marrow thing was blown out of proportion. Not that he wasn't seriously considering WWF all along. The WWF's advantage is that if he were to get over, he could be pushed right to the top in WWF because its top star, Shawn Michaels, matches up to him size-wise, and because there are no built-in blocks to the top as there are in WCW with so many people with too much control that would block him from being any more than a very much talked about mid-card performer. His future in WCW was that he'd probably eventually be positioned as the focal point of the cruiserweight division, which as it stands now, is a kiss of death as far as main event potential. As far as a move to bolster the career, WWF is better at getting people over and better for his specific upward mobility, but WCW, which as a general rule offers its stars more money and an easier schedule, is generally the place for financial security and family compatibility, which is generally more important in wrestlers past the age of 30, particularly with children, unless those wrestlers have bitter past experiences with WCW or for those who are marks for being recognized in airports by fans. Pillman's maneuverings all year were a combination of being diabolical, brilliant and sometimes insane, making himself one of the most talked about performers in the business through a series of worked shoot angles that led to a worked firing from WCW. Through it all, he really hadn't done anything all year of significance in the ring or as a drawing card, as much from lack of opportunity as anything else, although he did establish himself as one of the most talked about performers in the country. Nevertheless, despite his reputation for years as a top worker, he, because of his size, had been almost career typecast as a mid-card wrestler who could be counted on to put on some great undercard matches on pay-per-view shows, a Brad Armstrong with a little more upward mobility because of having more personality. With his WCW contract at $225,000 per year running out about a month before his 34th birthday, Pillman devised a long-term plan to work the world, using every means possible, to turn him into what was perceived to be the hottest heel in the business despite never actually main eventing, drawing any big houses or any major television ratings this year. Pillman's angles and vignettes, largely due to some very underrated acting ability and some thought-out creativity, became the talk of the wrestling business even if none of them anywhere wound up leading to anything that would draw. A series of incidents occurred starting in January in Las Vegas at the WCW Clash of Champions where, during a match with Eddie Guerrero, he grabbed the coat of Bobby Heenan, unbeknownst to Heenan, who has a very bad neck from all those years of taking crazy bumps for Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher, and Greg Gagne. Heenan freaked out and on live television uttered a memorable "What the fuck are you doing?" before storming off, eventually regrouping, and coming back out and doing a very tense remainder of the broadcast. This was the first of a series of incidents where people weren't sure exactly what was and wasn't planned and what was and wasn't part of the storyline. For the record, this specific incident was not a work, even though in hindsight, many in wrestling don't believe that. However, it did fit perfectly into the storyline where Bischoff, who apparently along with Pillman, Kevin Sullivan and maybe one or two others devised a series of worked shoots such as Pillman acting nutty on television and Bischoff continually acting as if he was shooting from the announcer's booth as if he were always one step from firing Pillman on the spot, an angle scheduled to build into a worked firing in such a high-profile manner carried to such a level that everyone in the company would be fooled, leading to a shocking comeback. Of course, this was all going to take place during the period that Pillman's contract was expiring, and he worked his former bosses into coming up with an idea that was really his idea, to enable him to have as much negotiating leverage as possible when the most important contract period of his career was coming up. Then came a few-second period during a tag match on Nitro which had virtually the entire WCW company and much of wrestling believing Sullivan and Pillman were actually shooting on live television, although those who closely knew Sullivan upon viewing it did think otherwise. Because of a mistake in focusing too heavily on the incident on television, it was a giveaway to those in the know 5 days later that it was an angle, leading to the "I respect you Booker man" comment that resulted in Pillman being the most talked about wrestling personality for a brief period of time, with many both in and out of wrestling believing the incident was a shoot, as was his subsequent firing. WCW, and mainly Hulk Hogan, seeing the response Pillman got on a Nitro in Winston-Salem, North Carolina after his firing, wanted Pillman back immediately, destroying the planned angle to hold him out and bring him back for something big, to be one of the gang of 8 goons that Hogan and Savage were going to go over at the uncensored pay-per-view. However, Pillman, who wasn't cleared to work because of throat surgery 10 days earlier, didn't appear. By this point, WCW began to believe that instead of being the ones doing the working, they were the ones that were being worked, and people in the company started speculating that the throat surgery was yet another Pillman work. It wasn't. WCW pushed that Pillman would return as a key day before the event, impulsed by Angle for Uncensored, while being aware he wasn't planning on coming, with the belief that as a pro, he'd show up and work the shot, since the belief was many have worked pay-per-view shows in the past in worse shape physically, which is also probably the case. When Pillman didn't work the show and made WCW look deceptive in advertising him, it led to some major bitterness, legitimately this time, with Sullivan, and many in WCW were talking that would be the end for Pillman, with the belief that because of his size, McMahon wouldn't show much interest and he'd come back begging and they'd make him pay for missing the pay-per-view. And initially McMahon didn't, apparently believing Pillman's newfound business reputation for being legitimately nuts to be a shoot. Pillman apparently had strong allies in Jim Cornette and Jim Ross in the WWF booking committee, who apparently convinced McMahon that Pillman's character of being psychotic that he portrayed 100% of the time when he was before the public was a work. Ironically, all was going according to plan, with a minor piece of reality like a motor vehicle wreck that nearly killed him not even getting in the way of his market value due to a promotional war, when under normal market conditions, it would have killed what little negotiating leverage he'd have had. Since WWF wanted Pillman, that meant WCW wanted not to lose him every bit as bad, if not worse. On the morning of June 1st, Pillman and Eric Bischoff agreed to a 3-year deal, which would pay him a figure believed to be in the range of $1,025,000 in total. However, Bischoff, when the contract was presented to Pillman's agents, had 2 provisions in the contract. One, and most importantly, 90-day cycles built into the contract, which basically meant WCW could terminate the contract if it wished after every quarterly period. Secondly, that Pillman wouldn't be flown first class to all his scheduled appearances. The latter provision, which Pillman demanded, was more of a negotiating leverage issue rather than a deal breaker, but the 90-day cycles was, in hindsight, the deal breaker. Bischoff refused to break on either provision and in reality, lost him over not backing down on the cycles. From Bischoff's standpoint, the cycles were probably important since Pillman's injuries in the wreck were severe to the point they had to reconstruct his ankle with bone from his hip. While doctors had said Pillman would be nearly 100% after a few-month recuperation period, there are no guarantees. If Pillman couldn't perform as he once could, Bischoff didn't want to get stuck with $1 million albatross of a contract. From Pillman's standpoint, the cycles were a deal-breaker because of his large family and because he was in reality only being offered a 90-day guaranteed contract, and most importantly because he believed and in some cases knew that the top talent in WCW like Randy Savage, Sting, Lex Luger, Kevin Nash, etc. didn't have 90-day cycles in their deals. With Bischoff believing the deal was done and the cycles were simply a negotiating point he was going to win, Pillman was reinserted into the storylines with clips of his last appearance airing on Nitro on June 3rd, and he was talked about as part of the beginnings of a potential angle which apparently would have led to a new Four Horsemen versus veteran Four Horsemen feud with Pillman and Chris Benoit as the leaders of a new group that would feud with Flair, Arnold Anderson. Many angles had been discussed over the months with Pillman, who was at one point scheduled to be the original tag partner of Flair's for the match with Kevin Green and Steve McMichael, an idea that had to be dropped when he suffered his injuries. In dramatic fashion, as all his moves of late have been, Pillman went back to McMahon and the two sides quickly came together for a 3-year deal. Money terms are not known, as there were confidentiality clauses in both sets of negotiations. It is reliably assumed Pillman wouldn't have walked away so quickly from the type of money Bischoff had put on the table if he wasn't getting something at least close to as good, if not better, on paper rather than simply McMahon's famous "all I'm offering is an opportunity" contract. From other sources, it is believed in this deal and in a few other recent deals that are being offered by WWF and perhaps one or two that have recently been closed, that WWF has, due to the war with WCW and losing so much main event talent in the process, begun restructuring the way it gives contracts, and that the top talent will be offered what will be known as downside guarantees. That phrase is believed to mean Titan will guarantee a certain income per year, but if the wrestler by the old standards, which is an undetermined percentage of the house based on positioning on the card of live events and pay-per-view events, earns more than his downside guarantee, he would earn the larger amount. Unlike WCW, which in most cases simply pays an agreed-upon rate no matter how the wrestler is used and how well the business does. WCW, in its previous contract with Pillman, had a 90-day right of first refusal clause, which means it believes it could hold up the deal and get Pillman if it were to equal the offer McMahon has put on paper. However, by taking the worked firing angle after walking out of a strap match with Kevin Sullivan, to the extreme Bischoff and Sullivan, in their attempt along with Pillman to work everyone in the company as well as the wrestlers and the wrestling fans that a worked angle was a shoot, had the company send a legal termination letter to Pillman so that everyone in the company wouldn't catch on to the fact it was an angle, despite it becoming obvious by a week later that it was an angle. The termination letter, originally part of the firing angle but legitimately written by WCW's legal department that also was included and it was all a work, could nullify the right of first refusal clause because it states Pillman was fired by WCW rather than the contract between the two sides simply expiring. Even if that wasn't the case, WWF structured two different contracts, one of which would be a 90-day contract as a non-wrestler, since he wouldn't be able to wrestle for a while anyway, which would cover the 90-day right of first refusal to a wrestling contract, and the other 33 months as a wrestling contract. Pillman initially wanted to keep the deal a secret and wanted to make yet another splash, showing up with no notice or forewarning to WCW or anyone else on WWF television, with WCW still believing it had a deal with him. However, the word got out later that night when Pillman missed an independent show in Cordell, Georgia. Pillman had either personally, or through family friend Joey Maggs who worked the show, contacted local promoter Ben Masters, saying he couldn't be there because of his meeting scheduled that day with McMahon in Connecticut. When Masters got the word, he tried to see what he could do to avoid the no-show, and worked to put together a situation where Pillman actually did a telephone interview in the local National Guard armory over the PA, insulting the area fans. At the beginning of the show, when it was unclear whether the Pillman telephone interview would be possible, it was posted at the door and refunds were offered because Pillman wouldn't be there as advertised. And it was announced in the building that Pillman wouldn't be there because he had just signed a contract with the WWF, that he was already on the WWF payroll, that they were prohibiting him from making the dates citing insurance risks. The former was true, although the latter wasn't. However, when Pillman did his interview via telephone, he denied having signed with the WWF, although since it was all done in his loose cannon character, nobody really believed him, and those involved with wrestling at the show quickly got the word out, in particular WCW trainer Terry Taylor, who was there working the show, and Bischoff was aware of it by the next morning as it was all over the internet and wrestling hotlines. By Monday night, it was plugged on Raw and even on the WWF's own hotline that Pillman had been signed, with them announcing the legit information that the contract would enable Pillman to continue to work independent dates with ECW, and he could retain his own personal 900 number and independent merchandising, conditions unique in a WWF contract. Reports followed everywhere the next day that Pillman said in Cordell that he had signed with WWF, although Pillman actually denied it in Cordell, and has publicly continued to deny it, going on the internet telling people to quit telling lies about him signing. The Pillman personality has become so unique in wrestling that many people believe he really didn't have a wreck. He most definitely did, that he really is nuts, and his character which he often plays in the dressing room has become reality. Stories as preposterous have gone around all the way to high places that he had the wreck on purpose to get plastic surgery to look like Shawn Michaels to feud with him. Pillman still looks nothing like Michaels, or to simply keep his name in the forefront. To add to the mystique, in his first wrestling appearance since the wreck last week in Philadelphia, he uttered the Mark Furman word, although in the context of talking about the rap band NWA. New Jack, standing on the stage when the interview was going on, freaked out and they had a confrontation backstage. Most believe it was actually part of an elaborate ECW shoot angle. It wasn't, although Pillman's end of it was a work by Pillman to get his character over. But New Jack's part of it wasn't an angle, and it wasn't planned, nor will anything in the future at ECW evolve from it. Pillman has worked on and off with ECW, starting through a deal approved by WCW and ECW to get over the WCW management angle that Pillman had been fired. Pillman's plan was to work with ECW on putting out a video and merchandising t-shirts, with the video to contain uncensored invective-laden angles building to a climactic match with Shane Douglas. Obviously, the injury put Pillman's wrestling on hold, as most talk about him not returning to the ring until September at the earliest. WWF has no qualms about Pillman continuing to work ECW, including completing the program with Douglas. It is expected Pillman's WWF introduction will be with the same gimmick as he created for himself at the end of his WCW run, and the introduction will be in a unique non-wrestling manner since he won't be able to wrestle for several more months, perhaps as either an announcer or a manager. A deceased former Buffalo area local wrestling star, who was more famous because of a restaurant that bore his last name, became the man who drew the biggest house in the history of World Championship Wrestling on June 7. The tribute to Elio DiPaolo, who was killed in 1995 after being hit by a car while crossing the street on a rainy night, the final event ever at the Buffalo War Memorial Auditorium, became the most locally talked about event ever put on by WCW. DiPaolo, a top area babyface in the late 50s and early 60s and was related by marriage to area promoter Pedro Martinez, whose Italian restaurant gained fame nationwide and was a regular hangout for area sports stars, was so famous locally that when he died, the news of his death was carried on the front page of the newspaper and the television networks broke into scheduled programming. His son Dennis came up with the idea of doing the show as a benefit to the local children's hospital and the Elio DiPaolo Scholarship Fund, both of which his father devoted time and resources to. Wrestling Legends at the Odd, a combination WCW house show and Legends show, drew a near sellout 14,852, 14,082 paid fans in the 16,000-seat arena, setting both a city and company record with a $193,456 house. The paid attendance was the largest in the history of WCW, with the old record paid crowd and gate being approximately 12,300 fans and $190,000 for the Great American Bash pay-per-view event in Baltimore in 1989, headlined by Ric Flair vs. Terry Funk. WCW's largest crowd in history is believed to be approximately 15,000 for a later 1989 match at the Omni in Atlanta, also headlined by Flair vs. Funk, although at that show all children were allowed in free, so it was freebie-laden with paid closer to 10,000. WCW was involved in the promotion of the AAA When Worlds Collide event in Los Angeles in 1994, which drew a $202,000 house. However, no WCW talent appeared on that show. It was also the largest gate ever for wrestling in the city, although not the largest crowd, as the record was set in 1985 when Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff had their big WWF run, and the Odd was one of the buildings they sold out. The first part of the show was a combination martial arts demonstration, which went way too long and didn't get over at all with the primarily wrestling crowd in attendance, an introduction of wrestlers and boxers who had headlined the arena in past years, and the tribute to DiPaolo by Bruno Sammartino, who often teamed with DiPaolo in the same building during the early 60s. Sammartino got the largest reaction of any of the Legends, followed by the reactions for Dominic DeNucci and longtime area main event heel Waldo von Erich. Other stars from Buffalo's past in attendance included Gene Kiniski, The Destroyer, Dick Bayer, Tony Parisi, Johnny Powers, Angelo Mosca, Johnny Barrett, a name I haven't heard in more than 20 years. He's now running a motel in Rochester, New York. Angelo Poffo, Reginald Love of the Love Brothers Tag Team, former manager/wrestler Bruce Swayze, Kurt Von Hess, Mario Frattaroli, and Woody Johnson. Despite the event being largely for charity and to pay tribute to a beloved local icon, politics still got in the way to some degree. Reportedly, Hulk Hogan was asked to appear at the show and refused because Sammartino, who he hates, was already committed to being there. Killer Kowalski, who was a friend of DiPaolo's, wanted to attend but felt politically that he shouldn't because of his affiliation with the WWF. The DiPaolo family had originally come up with the idea for the show and wanted to work with the WWF. However, a deal was put together by Bayer and WCW announcer Mike Tenay. WCW was guaranteed a figure in the neighborhood of $50,000 for the event, with much of the remainder going to local charities. Because of the success of the event, Dennis DiPaolo was able to put together a second Legends show for Buffalo for May 1997 in conjunction with WCW at the new Marine Midland Arena, although it would be hard to promote something like this as special a second time. The arena had at first wanted to book only with WWF, but the huge advance and great local publicity led to them going with the idea of booking WWF and WCW alternately. The show was a success largely due to the elder DiPaolo's popularity, the nostalgia that a Legends show in a market that hasn't done anything of the sort and has a wrestling tradition would have, and because the local media got behind the event with stories daily in the last week and tons of coverage by all the local newscasts, including a 30-minute block on the local lunchtime talk show the day of the event. It was described as a slight thumbs up as an event in that the atmosphere was great, but the matches themselves were largely just okay with the WCW wrestlers. Even with the record crowd, basically doing largely so-so bouts. Complete results saw 1. In a match of area midget wrestlers from the 70s, Pee Wee Jones pinned Farmer Pete in 7:54. Said to have been absolutely horrible. 2. Gino Brito beat Missing Link, Byron Dewey Robertson, in 6:12 when Link shoved the ref. Both of these guys should be in their mid to late 50s, so what can you expect? 3. Dom DiNucci and Tony Parisi, who were a frequent Italian tag team in the area in the late 60s and early 70s, I'd guess both to be about 60 years old, defeated Bruiser Bedlam and Bullwhip Danny Johnson in 12:46 when Parisi pinned Johnson. Bedlam and Johnson got better heat than the WCW guys that followed. 4. Diamond Dallas Page pinned Alex Wright after a low blow and a diamond cutter in 9:17. 2 stars. 5. Conan retained the U.S. title pinning Big Bubba in 6:37 after a dropkick and a roll-up. 1.5 star. 6. BK Wall Street pinned Desperado Joe Gomez in 7:14. Almost nobody knew who Gomez was. 1/2 star. 7. In what was universally described as the best match on the show, Nasty Boys beat Public Enemy in 9:10 in what was billed as a Buffalo Street fight. Nasty Boys had been in town for a few days ahead of time doing promotional work, and were really popular. They used trash cans, chairs, tables, etc. A typical match between these two teams with a finish that got a huge pop, as local football hero Jim Kelly threw Brian Knobs a Bills helmet and he hit Johnny Grunge with it for the pin. 2.75 stars. 8. Lex Luger retained the TV title pinning Jim Duggan in 5:15 after Duggan missed a tackle. Reports were that people were surprised how popular Duggan was with the crowd, particularly since Luger is from the Buffalo area. 3/4 star. 9. Randy Savage, with Father Angelo Poffo in his corner, pinned Ric Flair, with the Destroyer in his corner in 12:05 with a roll-up. Nothing special. 1.75 stars. 10. The Giant retained the WCW title beating Sting via DQ in 7:09 when Giant had Sting up for the choke slam and Luger ran in to make the save. 1.25 stars. Ironically, the WCW record gate was not the largest one of the weekend, as the WWS house show on June 9 at the Rosemont Horizon in suburban Chicago drew 13,650 fans and $229,222 with a triple headliner of Shawn Michaels vs. Goldust, Ultimate Warrior vs. Vader, and Undertaker vs. Mankind. It was the largest house for a non-pay-per-view wrestling event in Chicago since January 1990. The turnaround in WWF house show business was profiled in the March 19 issue of Amusement Business, which led off a story saying that the WWF has re-emerged as a touring powerhouse, saying the lull in WWF business was over. According to Osberta Arce, the senior vice president in charge of worldwide properties, the turnaround comes after more than a year of retooling staffing, licensing, touring and marketing. Ed Cohen, the senior VP of event bookings and operations, took over this year as the head of marketing of the live events. Among the changes made, aside from the obvious of better booking and the success of Michaels as a drawing card in the main event role, included sending market reps to the cities and doing more grassroots promotions. They've also changed the scheduling. In the past, to cut costs, tours were booked so that the talent could drive from one city to the next rather than the daily flight pattern that was the case during the golden era of the WWF. With booking approximately 15 shows per month, while the tours are still regional, if flights are needed to get the right arenas on the right dates, they are done. They've also upped the local advertising budgets and using direct mail to market events. The WWF's main fan base is males 18 to 34, which is the traditional pro wrestling fan base nearly everywhere in the world. In the past, WWF heavily marketed aimed at young children. The Japanese wrestling world is about to change with the official announcement on June 10 at a press conference of the debut of a 24-hour cable channel known as Fighting TV. The channel, which will start on September 1 as a premium channel on cable, as compared with the United States, cable in Japan is still in its infancy, probably a good 15 years plus behind the US, and this would be the equivalent of the starting point of ESPN, will fill its programming with pro wrestling and martial arts events. It had been reported here months ago about the plans for the station to launch this September. Appearing at the press conference included Antonio Inoki, Akira Maeda, and Shinya Hashimoto, while an exhibition match was performed by Michinoku Pro's Great Sasuke vs. Tiger Mask as an example of the type of programming offered. With that much time to fill, it is expected that most of the smaller groups in Japan, which have almost no television, save the one-hour Champ Forum show which rotates covering the various smaller promotions, will get more of a television presence. In addition, it opens up television time for the various incarnations of Vale Tudo both in Japan and the US, and for more exposure of American and perhaps even Mexican, provided the production standards improve, pro wrestling. Over the past week, WAR and UWFI have made separate announcements about 4 major shows over the next 4 months, consisting of 2 very ambitious projects. WAR announced the lineups for its July 20th and July 21st shows, both at Tokyo Sumo Hall, while UWFI announced and put tickets on sale for shows on August 17th and September 11th at the 46,300-seat Jingu Baseball Stadium in Tokyo. The 2 stadium shows will be co-promoted by UWFI and Nikkei Sports, a daily sports newspaper which has strong coverage of pro wrestling. All that is known at press time is that the August 17th show will be headlined by Nobuhiko Takada vs. Yoji Anjo, and the September 11th show will be the first singles meeting ever of Takada vs. Genichiro Tenryu. Jingu Baseball Stadium was the site for one famous pro wrestling event in December 1993, Takada's biggest career match before the current record-setting run. In that main event, Takada beat Vader with the armbreaker in defense of his UWFI World Heavyweight title before a sellout crowd with thousands turned away. On paper, the idea of running 2 consecutive months in an outdoor stadium by a smaller promotion sounds awfully ambitious, particularly since publicity in August will be split since New Japan's G1 Climax Series and All Japan Women's 2 nights at Budokan Hall all take place just before this event. In addition, while Andrew has a big mouth and has proven to be a great heat-getting heel, his drawing power, at least when it comes to the stadium level, is unproven. Takada Tenryu is a legit dream match and on its own could draw very well at a stadium, but being the second stadium show for a group in a 4-week period makes it ambitious as well. However, if these shows draw well, Takada will have done the unthinkable in a run which began last October with 5 successful outdoor stadium shows including 3 of the biggest dates in the history of wrestling, all in the same city in less than a 1-year period. Both shows will have all seats priced at $70 and $50, which are extremely low ringside prices for Tokyo major shows which usually top out anywhere from $100 to $300, but high low-end ticket prices which traditionally bottom between $10 and $30. WAR held a press conference on June 9 announcing its July 20th and July 21st lineups for Sumo Hall. July 20th will be headlined by a one-night 6-man tag team tournament with the teams being Tenryu and Tatsumi Fujinami and Nobutaka Araya, Takada and Masahiko Kakihara and Yuvi Sano, UWFI Trio, Hiromichi Fuyuki and Geto Jado, Koji Kiao, and Masaaki Mochizuki and Koki Kitahara, Riki Choshu and Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Nishimura, New Japan-style trio, John Tena and Arashi and Osamu Teitoko, all 3 are ex-sumos, Kazuo Yamazaki and Osamu Kido and Takashi Iizuka, New Japan submission trio, and Anjo and Yoshihiro Takayama and Kenichi Yamamoto, Golden Cups trio. The pairings haven't been announced, but as a way to get a kickstart on ticket sales, it was announced that the Tenryu team and the Takada team would face each other in the first round. Also on the card will be the Japanese debut of Juventud Guerrera, defending the WWA welterweight title against Rey Mysterio Jr. The international junior tag titles will be defended by Lance Storm and Yuji Yasuhiro against Jushin Liger and El Samurai, and Ultimo Dragon and Nobukazu Hirai open up against Big Titan and Lionheart, Chris Jericho. The July 21st show will be headlined by Tenryu vs. Anjo. I've got to believe with a stadium show upcoming, Anjo will get the big upset here to make him credible against Takada, and of course Takada will beat him, and Tenryu will get the payback by beating Takada in the stadium show. Kitahara vs. Kakihara, Fujinami and Shiro Koshinaka vs. Takada and Hiromitsu Kanehara, Choshu and Kojima vs. Fuyuki and Titan Jado vs. Takayama, Dragon and Yasuhiro and Storm and Mysterio Jr. vs. Liger and Geto and Lionheart and Guerrera, Tenta vs. Mystery Opponent, Araya vs. Michiyoshi Ohara and Hirai and Teidoko vs. Sano and Kazushi Sakuraba. The biggest test of Pancrase in the United States takes place on June 14th with its second pay-per-view show, entitled Brawl at Budokan, taped on May 16th at Tokyo Budokan Hall. The first Pancrase event on US pay-per-view aired on April 13th and did a surprising 0.25 buy rate and an equally surprising 95.1% thumbs-up response in this publication's poll, particularly since Pancrase stylistically is so different from both the more violent Ultimate Fighting and more flashy and entertainment-oriented pro wrestling world. The first buy rate really doesn't tell a story in what type of potential Pancrase has, because virtually all the buyers were doing so based purely on curiosity, having no idea what the shows really looked like. The poll results, coming from a combination of about half of whom had seen the event previously on tape and knew exactly what it was going to be like and half of whom had never seen it before, was a positive sign. As mentioned before, the strong point of the first show wasn't the match quality, aside from a strong main event, but the work of Ken Shamrock in explaining the style to the novice audience. The real sign in how well the first show did in getting novice viewers interested in the product is how the buy rate holds up for this show. A buy rate that stays relatively close to the first one indicates the show went over well to the majority of viewers and shows potential to have staying power. A marked increase or decrease tell different stories. Based on the reports we've received by those who have either seen the show live, were involved with the show live, and those who have seen the event as it aired on Japanese television say from a match quality standpoint this show is far superior to the first show, and with Bruce Beck replacing Don Wilson as Shamrock's sidekick, the announcing should actually be better as well. We've been told that in particular, the Frank Shamrock vs. Boss Rutan match was the best King of Pancrase title match to date with an unbelievable 5-minute segment. The Oleg Toktarov vs. Ryushi Yanagisawa match from the May 16 Budokan show won't air on the pay-per-view. Toktarov's management in signing the deal with Pancrase to do the show had a clause written in that it would have the right to veto the match airing in the United States on pay-per-view. Even though it was said to have been an exciting match and Semaphore Entertainment Group wanted to air it, since Yanagisawa won via 1-0 score with the point being due to an illegal finger choke red card, Toktarov's management exercised its option. The pay-per-view lineup will be Yoshiki Takahashi vs. Takafumi Ito, Manabu Yamada vs. Sami Schlitt, Jason DeLucia vs. Asami Shibuya, Masakatsu Funaki vs. August Smile, Guy Mesger vs. Minoru Suzuki, and the title match on top. Results: May 20th, Nuevo Laredo, AAA, 12,500 sellout. La Sirenita and Reina Gallegos and Zulimabi Neftali and La Monster, Bertha Faye, and Martha Villalobos, Villano 3 and El Sanguinario and Jerry Estrada be Latin Lover and Pantera and Oro Jr., Mexican Light Heavyweight title, Pimpinela Escarlata be La Parca DQ, Octagon and Pero Aguayo, and Mascara Sagrada Jr. be Killer and Jason the Terrible and Pierroth Jr. May 24th, Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL, Bracito de Oro and Orito be Felinito and Pierroth Tito, La Diabolica and Lady Star and La Infernal be Xochitl Hamada and Lady Apache and Princesa Blanca, Super Astro and Bronco and Mr. Niebla be Archangel and Moger, and Halcon Negro Jr. DQ, Ringo Mendoza and La Fiera and Silver King be Guerrero de la Muerte and Black Panther and Chicago Express DQ, Apollo Dantes and Negro Casas and Fuerza Guerrera be Lizmark and Atlantis and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. May 24th, Nezahualcoyotl AAA, 2,200, Ultra Rayo and Mr. Rayo be Loco Valentino and Leopardo Negro winners and Super Calo and Salsero be Pero Silva and Picudo and Super Crazy, Pantera and Blue Demon Jr. and Oro Jr. be Jerry Estrada and Heavy Metal and Espectro DQ, Mexican HWT title Pierroth Jr. be CN Caras DQ, La Parca and Octagon and Mascara Sagrada Jr. be Kraken and Jason the Terrible and Cybernetico DQ. May 30th, West Palm Beach, Florida, WWF, 4,777 sellout, Duke Drosy be Aldo Montoya, Bushwhackers be New Rockers, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith be Ahmed Johnson and Jake Roberts DQ, Mark Marrow be Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Justin Bradshaw be Barry Horowitz, Johnson be Vader, Savio Vega be Steve Austin, Undertaker be Mankind, WWF title, Shawn Michaels be Goldust. May 30th, Philadelphia, Worldwide Wrestling Alliance, 120, Len Osborne be Blue Thunder, Derek Domino and Steve Savage DDQ, Harley Lewis and John Rock, Nasty Angel be Fantasia, Jack Hammerker Primo Carnera 3, Frankie Burns be Fabulous Martine, Psychotron be Stevie Richards, Nikolai Volkov be Bam Bam Bigelow DQ, Hercules be Typhoon, Mike Sharp be Diablo Cujo, Dino Sendoff May 31st, Nezahualcoyotl AAA, Pesadilla and Leopardo Negro be Los Vaqueros Fantasmas, Kid Guzman and K2 and Nuevo Audas be Los Machos 1 and 2 and 3 DQ, Tony Arce and Volcano and Rocco Valente be Angel Mortal and Mr. Condor and Marabunta, Fishman and Jerry Estrada and Super Crazy be Oro Jr. and Halcon Dorado Jr. and El Mexicano, Octagon and Tinieblas Jr. and Hong Kong Lee, Kato Kung Lee, be Kraken and Los Villanos 3 and 5 Core. May 31st, Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL, 3,500, La Diabolica and Lady Star be Jocelyn and Princesa Blanca, Mr. Niebla and Atlantico and Filoso B. Guerrero Maya and Guerrero del Futuro and Damian El Guerrero La Fiera and Bronco and Super Astro B. Scorpio Jr. and Mocho Cota and Guerrero de la Muerte, Dandy and Dos Cars and Lizmark B. Negro Casas and Chicago Express and Bestia Salvaje, CMLL Heavyweight title, Rayo de Jalisco Jr. be Apollo Dantes. May 31st, Fairford, Manitoba, IWA Hardcore Wrestling, 275, Bad news Alan B. Bluto Belushi, The Natural Don Callis, B. Lance Storm, Male Nurse and Earl the Orderly B. Chi Chi Cruz and Adam Impact, Dr. Luther, Len St. Clair and N.C. Timothy Flowers, Jerry Morrow and Gama Singh B. Desperado and Belushi, Doink the Clown B. Natural. June 1st Fort Alexander, Manitoba, IWA Hardcore Wrestling, 1023, Bad news Alan B. Desperado, The Natural B. Lance Storm, Adam Impact and Chi Chi Cruz B. Male Nurse and Earl the Orderly, Kama Singh B. Carmen the Pizza Man, Dr. Luther N.C. Timothy Flowers, Doink the Clown B. The Natural. June 2nd Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL, 1000, Kung Fu Jr. and Angel de Plata B. Cofre and Dr. O'Borman Jr., Escudero Rojo and Reyes Veloz and Rey Bucanero B. Alacron de Durango and Vencedor and Ultimatum, Olympico and Ciclone Ramirez and Olympus B. Yone Jinjin and Alcon Negro Jr. and Cadaver de Ultra Tumba DQ. Fantasma and El Brazo and Solar Uno B. Cajos and Americo Rocca and Archangel, Dr. Wagner Jr. and Grand Marcus Jr. and El Eo del Gladiador de Atlantis and Silver King and Hector Garza. June 2nd Winnipeg, Manitoba, IWA Hardcore Wrestling, 340, Bad news Alan B. Bluto Belushi, The Natural B. Lance Storm, Male Nurse and Earl the Orderly B. Chi Chi Cruz and Adam Impact, Dr. Luther N.C. Timothy Flowers, Jerry Morrow and Gama Singh B. Desperado and Belushi, Doink the Clown B. Natural. June 2nd Freehold, New Jersey, New Jack City Wrestling, 155, Rocco Dorsey B. Rockin' Rico, Misfits B. Lost Boys, Ghetto Blaster B. Cujo, Supernova B. Nomad, Bam Bam Bigelow B. Mike Sharp, Lucifer N.C. Hellraiser, Ace Darling B. Ubas, El Puerto Ricano, ECW title, Raven B. Tommy Dreamer. June 3rd Leon, Guanajuato, AAA, 3,500 Sellout, Espectritos 1 and 2 B. Mascarada Sagrada and Super Muñequito DQ, Tony Arce and Vulcano and Rocco Valente B. Super Muñeco and Bobby Lee Jr. and Oro Jr., Blue Demon Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr. won 4 corners match over Frisbee and Alcon Dorado Jr., Payaso Rojo and Caris La Momia and Payasos Amarillo and Azul, Conan and Octagon and Tinieblas Jr. B. Killer and Los Villanos 3 and 5 DQ. June 3rd Peguis, Manitoba, IWA Hardcore Wrestling, 300, Bad news Alan B. Bluto Belushi, The Natural B. Lance Storm, Male Nurse and Earl the Orderly B. Chi Chi Cruz and Adam Impact, Dr. Luther N.C. Timothy Flowers, Jerry Morrow and Gama Singh B. Desperado and Belushi, Doink the Clown B. The Natural. June 4th Kumamoto, New Japan, 3000 Sellout, Akitoshi Saito and Kunyaki Kobayashi B. Tokumitsu Ishizawa and Dean Malenko, Wild Pegasus and Norio Onaga B. El Samurai and Black Tiger, Osamu Kido and Kazuo Yamazaki B. Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Nishimura, Kingo Kimura B. Tadao Yasuda, Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto B. Yuji Nagata and Kensuke Sasaki, Jushin Liger B. Shinjiro Otani, Akira Nagami and Shiro Koshinaka B. Takashi Izuka and Keiji Muto, Masa Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, and Hiro Saito B. Riki Chashu and Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata. June 4th Zama, All Japan, 1400, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B. Kentaro Shiga, Manukia Mossman and Brian Diet B. Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto B. Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi and Mighty Inoue, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness B. Gary Albright and the Lacrosse, Kena Kobashi B. Giant Kimala 2, Jun Akiyama and Tamon Honda and Takao Mori B. Mitsuharu Misawa and Satoru Asako and Misao Inoue, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and the Patriot B. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa. June 4th Louisville, Kentucky USWA, Punisher D. Bart Sawyer, Cyberpunk Ice B. Leon Downs, Flex Cabana B. Tony Falk, Cyberpunk Fire B. Bill Dundee and Samantha, Men on Mission B. Doug Gilbert and Brian Christopher, Non-Title Lumberjack Strap Match, Jesse James Armstrong B. Jeff Jarrett, Gilbert 1 Battle Royal. June 4th Tokyo Korakuen Hall IWA, 900 Orito B. Filinito, Emi Motokawa B. Kyoko Ichiki, Silver Jason B. Keizo Matsuda, Vampiro Casanova, EMLL, B. Katsumi Hirano, Black Hearts, Dave Heath and B. Steel Leather, Eddie Watts and Leatherface, Rick Patterson, Keisuke Yamada and Hiroshi Itakura and Takashi Okano and Cactus Jack B. Yakinori Tsukioka and Flying Kid Ichihara and Mr. Ganasuke and Tarzan Goto 2325. June 4th Kanazawa, Battlerts, 438, Takeshi Ono B. Axe Thunder Otsuka, Minoru Tanaka B. Disu Alberto, Takamichi Noku B. Satoshi Oniyama, Shuichi Funaki B. Naohiro Hoshikawa, Carl Greco and Yuki Ishikawa B. Katsumi Yujuda and Daisuke Ikeda. June 5, Rome, Georgia, WCW Saturday Night and Main Event tapings, 2,400, 1,800 paid. Kevin Sullivan be Mighty Yankee, Elgato, Pat Tanaka, be Kurosawa, Mahler, Mike Enos, be Steve Dahl, Craig Pittman be Rob Ruckus, Scott Norton and Ice Train be Gambler and Rick Fargo. Rick and Scott Steiner turn Norton and Train. Steven Regal be Billy Kidman, Sullivan be Al Phillips, Arnold Anderson be Steve Armstrong, WCW TV title, Lex Luger be David Taylor, John Tena be Diamond Dallas Page be Kurosawa, Nasty Boys be Mark Starr and Mike Wenner, Sting be Hugh Morris. June 5, Beppu, New Japan, 3,850, Tokumitsu Ishizawa be Kunyaki Kobayashi Core, be Yano 4 and Norio Oniga and Dean Malenko be Jerry Lynn and Franz Schumann and Wild Pegasus, Tadao Yasuda be Hiro Saito, Tatsuhito Takaiwa be El Samurai, Shinjiro Otani be Black Tiger, Satoshi Kojima be Michiyoshi Ohara, Akira Nagami and Tatsutoshi Goto and Shiro Koshinaka be Jushin Liger and Keiji Muto and Kensuke Sasaki, Masa Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan be Akitoshi Saito and Kengo Kimura, Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata and Osamu Nishimura be Yuji Nagata and Takashi Iizuka and Kazuo Yamazaki. June 5, Odawa IWA 100, Takeshi Sato be Jun Nagaoka, Emi Motokawa be Kadota, Orito and Tudor the Turtle be Feline Nito and Akinori Tsukioka, Silver Jason be Katsumi Hirano, Vampiro Casanova be Hiroshi Itakura, Black Hearts be Keizo Matsuda and Keisuke Yamada, Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke and Flying Kid Ichihara be Takashi Okano and Steel Leather and Leatherface. June 5, Chiba All Japan Women, 1,690, Genki Misae be Yoshiko Tamura, Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito be Yumi Fukawa and Saya Endo, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe be Asia Kong and Tashio Yamada and Etsuko Mita, Mima Shimoda be Kumiko Makawa, Manami Toyota and Shaparita Asari be Yumiko Hata and Reed Tamada. June 5, Winkler, Manitoba, IWA Hardcore Wrestling, 570, Timothy Flowers DDQ Bluto Belushi, Kaiser Khosrow be Ultimate Firefly, Lance Storm, Gama Singh and Jerry Morrow be Jethro Hogg and Belushi, Male Nurse and Earl the Orderly be Chi Chi Cruz and Adam Impact, Dr. Luther be Desperado, Doink the Clown be The Natural. June 6, Rockford, Illinois, WWF, 3,611, Justin Bradshaw be Barry Horowitz, New Rockers be Aldo Montoya and Duke Drosy, Savio Vega be Owen Hart, Mark Marrow be Hunter Hurst Helmsley, Jake Roberts be Steve Austin, Ultimate Warrior be Vader WWF Tag Titles, Godwins be Smoking Guns Corps, Ahmed Johnson be Davey Boy Smith DQ, Undertaker be Mankind, WWF Title, Shawn Michaels be Goldust. June 6, Nagasaki, New Japan, 2,700, Akitoshi Saito and Kengo Kimura be Yutaka Yoshi and Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Tokumitsu Ishizawa be Yano 4, El Samurai and Wild Pegasus be Norio Oniga and Black Tiger, Osamu Nishimura be Michiyoshi Ohara, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masa Chono be Shinjiro Otani and Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata, Satoshi Kojima and Keiji Muto be Yuji Nagata and Kazuo Yamazaki, Dean Malenko be Jushin Liger, Takashi Iizuka and Kensuke Sasaki and Shinya Hashimoto be Akira Nagami and Tatsutoshi Goto and Shiro Koshinaka. June 6, Fukushima, IWA, 250, Orito be Feline Nito, Emi Motokawa be Kadota, Tudor the Turtle and Akinori Tsukioka be Jun Nagaoka and Takeshi Sato, Black Hearts be Katsumi Hirano and Keizo Matsuda, Steel Leather and Leatherface be Silver Jason, and Vampiro Casanova, Barbed Wire Board Deathmatch Keisuke Yamada be Mr. Ganasuke, Tarzan Goto and Flying Kid Ichihara be Hiroshi Itakura and Takashi Okano. June 6, Portage La Prairie, Manitoba, IWA Hardcore Wrestling, 600, Brooklyn Brawler be Kaiser Khosrow, Adam Impact and Chi Chi Cruz be Male Nurse and Early Orderly, Timothy Flowers NC Bluto Belushi, Ultimo Dragon be The Natural to win IWA title, Jerry Morrow and Johnny Smith be Jethro Hogg and Desperado, Big Titan, Rick Bogner, be Male Nurse, Chris Jericho be Lance Storm, Morrow and Gama Singh be Cruz and Impact, Dr. Luther be Desperado, Doink be Natural. June 6, Amarillo, Texas, Blast from the Past Wrestling, The Viking be Greg Robertson, Doink the Clown, Dusty Wolf be Casey Cannon, Tom Jones be Treach Phillips Jr., Wolf be Manny Villalobos, Tim Brooks DDQ Randy Rhodes, Dick Murdoch be Rod Price. June 7, Tokyo Budokan Hall All Japan, 16,300 sellout, Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton be Kentaro Shiga and Satoru Asako 810, Doug Furnace B. Masao Inoue 729, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Mitsuo Momota and Rusher Kimura B. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi 1140, The Patriot and the Lacrosse B. Dan Crawford and Mike D. at 1044, Giant Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshinari Ogawa B. Ryukaku Izumida and Takao Mori and Tomo Honda 1245, Gary Albright and Giant Kimala 2B Kenta Kobashi and Monukia Mossman 1439. PWF and International Tag Titles, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama B. Steve Williams and Johnny Ace 3009 Triple Crown Kiritao B. Toshiaki Kawada 1741. June 7 Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center UWFI War 4000, Hiromitsu Kanehara B. James Stone ECW Little Guido, Masahito Kakihara B. Billy Scott, Koki Kitahara B. Kazushi Sakuraba, Yui Sano, Naoki Sano, B. Masked 200%, Nobuhiko Takada B. Arashi, Isao Takagi, War 6-man tag titles, Geto and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki Yoji Anjo and Kenichi Yamamoto and Yoshihiro Takayama, who win titles 2053. June 7 Kokobun, New Japan 2500 sellout, Dean Malenko and Tokumitsu Ishizawa B. Yu Takayoshi and Yuji Nagata, Wild Pegasus B. Franz Schumann, Norio Onaga B. Shinjiro Otani, Junji Hirata B. Tadao Yasuda, Jushin Liger and El Samurai B. Ren Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masa Chono B. Akitoshi Saito and Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami, Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Izuka B. Osamu Nishimura and Shinya Hashimoto, Satoshi Kojima and Kensuke Sasaki and Keiji Muto B. Tatsutoshi Goto and Kengo Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka. June 7 Sakai IWA 150, Akinori Tsukioka B. Jun Nagaoka, Emi Motokawa B. Kadota, Tutor the Turtle B. Takeshi Sato, Orito B. Feline Nito, Keizo Matsuda and Keisuke Yamada and Takashi Okano B. Silver Jason and Black Hearts, Vampiro Casanova B. Katsumi Hirano, Tarzan Goto and Flying Kid Ishihara and Mr. Ganasuke B. Steel Leather and Leatherface and Hiroshi Itakura. June 7 Selkirk, Manitoba, IWA Hardcore Wrestling, 550 Christian Cage B. Lance Storm, Timothy Flowers and C. Bluto Belushi, Male Nurse and Earl the Orderly B. Adam Impact and Chi Chi Cruz, Doink the Clown B. The Natural Johnny Smith and Jerry Morrow B. Cruz and Impact, Nurse and Orderly B. Smith and Morrow to win IWA Tag Team titles, Big Titan B. Chris Jericho DQ, Brooklyn Brawler B. Kaiser Kozro DQ, Nurse and Orderly B. Smith and Morrow, Dr. Luther B. Desperado, Natural B. Ultimo Dragon. June 7th Cordell, Georgia, Peach State Wrestling, 470, David Jericho NC Carolina Kid, Lee Thomas B. Boladuke, Malia Hasaka B. Candy Divine DQ, Joey Maggs B. PYT Frederick, Fred Avery Core, Rock and Roll Express B. Rex King and Steve Dahl, Terry Taylor B. Billy Black DQ. June 7th Alexandria, Virginia, Independent Pro Wrestling Alliance 250 sellout, Steve Corino B. Sheik Ali Amin, Julio Sanchez, Mark Schrader B. Quinn Nash, Abbuda Singh, Boo Bradley, and Darkside Rebel, Chuck Williams, B. Lucifer and Iron Warrior, Dan Severn B. Jimmy Z, Jimmy Cicero B. Virgil DQ, Corporal Punishment B. Gorgeous George 3 DQ, King Kong Bundy B. Big Slam Vader, Johnny Gunn B. Q Ball Carmichael. June 8th Kokura, New Japan 2200, Yuji Nagata B. Utaka Yoshi, Black Tiger B. Norio Onaga, Akira Nagami B. Franz Schumann, Jushin Liger and El Samurai B. Viano 4 and Dean Malenko, Shinjiro Otani and Kensuke Sasaki B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Wild Pegasus, Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto and Shiro Koshinaka B. Osamu Nishimura and Satoshi Kojima and Keiji Muto, Takashi Izuka and Kazuo Yamazaki B. Akitoshi Saito and Kengo Kimura, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masachono B. Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata and Shinya Hashimoto. June 8th Reading, Pennsylvania, ECW, 250, Bubba Ray Dudley and D. Von Dudley B. J.T. Smith and Supernova, Hack Myers D. Axel Rotten, Mikey Whipwreck B. L. Puerto Ricano, Devin Storm and Damian Kane NC Bad Crew, Taz B. Storm, Paul Verlins B. Jason Helton, ECW TV title, Pitbull No. 2 B. Shane Douglas, Falls Count Anywhere, Brian Levy Tommy Dreamer, ECW title, Raven B. Sandman, ECW tag titles, Eliminators B. Gangstas. June 8th Gunma All Japan Women, Yumi Fukawa D. Yoshiko Tamura, Ri Tamada B. Genki Misae, Tashio Yamada D. Mima Shimoda, Etsuko Mita and Yumiko Harabi Saya Endo and Tomoko Watanabe, Mariko Yoshida B. Asia Kong, Anami Toyota and Kaoru Ito and Shaparita Asari B. Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue and Kumiko Maikawa. June 8 Tokyo AWA 200 Takeshi Sato and Keizo Matsudabi Akinori Tsukioka and Jun Nagaoka, Emi Motokawa Kadota, Katsumi Hirano Tudor the Turtle, Filinito Orito, Steel Leather and Leatherface Silver Jason and Vampiro Casanova, Black Hearts Flying Kitty Ichihara and Mr. Ganasuke, Barbed Wire Board Deathmatch 1 vs 3, Tarzan Goto Hiroshi Itakura and Keisuke Yamada and Takashi Okano. June 8 Kameda, Michinoku Pro, 1543 Billy Blaze Saito, Wellington Wilkins Jr. Masato Yakashiji, Mascara Magica Grand Naniwa, Great Sasuke and Grand Hamada Naohiro Hoshikawa and Tiger Mask, Shiryu and Men's Teo and Dick Togo Shoichi Funaki and Takamichinoku and Super Delphin. June 8 Yardville, New Jersey, NWA, 600 Sellout, Ralph Soto Gino Caruso, Ace Darling and Inferno Kid PG-13, Boogie Woogie Brown Rick Ratchet, Twiggy Ramirez Mike Vendetta, Ghetto Blaster Rocco Dorsey, Boxing, Tommy Firo Dennis Coraluzzo, Bad Attitude Sons of Gestapo, King Kong Bundy Johnny Gunn, Triangle Match for North American title Tommy Cairo over Ian Rotten and Derek Domino. June 8 Lake City, Arkansas, North American All-Star Wrestling, Justin St. John Ron McClarty, Samantha Miss Texas, Colorado Kid Charlie Parker, Bill Dundee Ricky Steele, Giant Warrior Jerry Lawler DQ. June 8 Westford, Massachusetts, IWF, 750, Tim McNeely Jim Cody, Little Leprechaun Dana Carpenter, Brian Walsh Outpatient, Mike Holla Chris Duffy, Title, Antoine Roy Smooth Operator DQ, Killer Kowalski Ref, Bushwhacker Butch Miller Nikolai Volkov DQ. June 9 Chicago Rosemont Horizon WWF, 13,650, Justin Bradshaw Barry Horowitz 3/4 of a star, New Rockers Aldo Montoya and Duke Drosy 1 1/2 star, Savio Vega Owen Hart 1 3/4 stars, Mark Marrow Hunter Hurst Helmsley 2.5 stars, Ultimate Warrior Vader Core Dud WWF Tag Titles, Smoking Guns Godwins 1 1/4 stars, Davey Boy Smith Ahmed Johnson Core 1 star, Steve Austin Jake Roberts 1 star, Undertaker Mankind 2 3/4 stars, WWF title, Shawn Michaels Goldust 2 3/4 stars. June 9 Tatari, New Japan, 3,800, Akitoshi Saito Takayoshi, Tadao Yasuda Tatsuhiro Takaiwa, Osamu Nishimura Franz Schumann, Dean Malenko and Black Tiger Villano 4 and Wild Pegasus, Jushin Liger and El Samurai Shinjiro Otani and Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Masa Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito Yuji Nagata and Takashi Iizuka and Kazuo Yamazaki, Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata Akira Nagami and Kengo Kimura, Keiji Muto and Satoshi Kojima and Kensuke Sasaki Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto. June 9 Tokyo Korakuen Hall All Japan Women, 1,950 Sellout, Takako Inoue Yumi Fukawa, Genki Misai and Atsuko Mita Saya Endo and Yumiko Hata, Kumiko Makawa Chikako Shiratori, Tomoko Watanabe and Kaoru Ito Tashio Yamada and Mima Shimoda 2219, Ritamata and Kyoko Inoue and Asia Kong Shaparita Asari and Mariko Yoshida and Manami Toyota 2405. June 9 Nahamatsu Michinoku Pro, 562, Wellington Wilkins Jr. Masato Yakashiji, Shoichi Funaki and Takamichinoku Naohiro Hoshikawa and Mascara Magica, Great Sasuke and Tiger Mask and Grand Hamada Shiryu and Men's Teo and Dick Togo DQ, Super Delphin Grand Naniwa. June 10 Wheeling, West Virginia, WCW Monday Nitro Tapings, Scott Steiner Booker T, Diamond Dallas Page Jim Powers Sting Meng, Jim Duggan David Taylor, WCW title, The Giant Scott Norton, Steve Regal Billy Kidman, Public Enemy Nasty Boys DQ, WCW Tag Titles, Sting and Lex Luger NC Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson. Special thanks to Graham Tripp, Dominic Valenti, Adam Pennison, Dean Ias, Scott Hudson, James Titus, Jesse Money, Greg John, Peggy Watkins, James Stanios, Kim Lamberth, David Milliken, Chuck Longerman, Danny Deese, Kevin Heilbronner, Norm Matthews, C.T. Goss, Rob Cachel Ries, Ken Doucet, Bruce Bennett, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Jesse Earhard, Bob Garst, Kevin Booker, Lance Levine, Jesse Money, Eddie Sharkey. Japanese Television Rundown. May 12, All Japan. 1. Haruka Eigen and Ryukaku Izumida beat Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto when Eigen pinned Kimura for the first time with a schoolboy. The funniest part was when Momota punched Eigen in the chest, and he did the spit spot right in Kimura's face. A brutal match, and that word isn't meant in a good way. -1 star. 2. Masafuchi and Yoshinari Ogawa and Masao Inoue beat Kentaro Shiga and Satoru Asako, and Giant Baba and Ogawa pinned Shiga with a roll-through on a flying body press. It was terrible when Baba was in. It was very good when Asako was in with Inoue. Altogether decent. 2 stars. The rest of the show consisted of clips of finishes from the Champion Carnival Tour of Stan Hansen vs Akira Tao, Steve Williams vs Toshiaki Kawada, Kenta Kobashi vs Gary Albright, Kawada vs Mitsuharu Misawa, and Tao vs Williams in the final match. Hansen Tao was unbelievably bad, like in the negative star range based on the 230 that aired. It was actually shocking how bad it was. Williams Kawada had good heat, and Williams' winning move, the backdrop driver, was totally scary as he dropped Kawada straight down on his head. It was one of the scarier suplexes you'll ever see. Kobashi Albright you can't tell much from, although at least the finish was good. Misawa Kawada aired the final 230 of a 30-minute draw, and the crowd heat was incredible. I don't doubt this is a match worth searching out when the home video is released. The Tao Williams finish was great, but that match aired in its entirety the week before on television, and it was one of the better matches of the year. May 18th, New Japan. 1. Masa Chono beat Lex Luger with the SDF in 1434. Luger's elbow got cut up early. Bad match. It wasn't terrible, but it was a long match with not much excitement. 1 star. 2. Randy Savage pinned Hiroyoshi Tenzan in 9:49. Tenzan carried the entire match until the finish, when he missed a moonsault. Savage used the elbow, but Tenzan kicked out, which got a pop. After 2 more elbows, Savage got the pin with a small package, which people almost laughed at. 3/4 star. 3. Road Warriors and Power Warrior, Kensuke Sasaki, beat Steiners and Scott Norton in 14-15. The two sides traded big moves. Occasional spots didn't look good but were offset by some killer moves and an exciting finish. Lots of saves after finishing moves during the last few minutes, such as Norton using a power bomb, Rick Steiner a German suplex, Scott doing the Frankensteiner, Power the reverse Ipponze and Power strangle, Road Warriors using the double impact, Rick Steiner doing the bulldog off the top rope, called Manhattan Bulldog for some reason in Japan, before Animal pinned Rick after a power slam off the middle rope. 3.5 stars. May 19th, All Japan. 1. Kimala 2 pinned Izumida with a splash off the top rope. Izumida even threw in a top A. 3/4 star. 2. Kobashi pinned Manukia Mossman with a power bomb and jackknife pin. In Japan they are 2 different moves. Mossman looked green, but the two put together a pretty good match. 3 stars. 3. Williams and Johnny Ace and Patriot beat Albright and Kawada and Tama and Honda. The losing team was put together as a theme since all were great amateur wrestlers before going pro, while the winning team are regular partners. Actually, of the 3, Honda was by far the best amateur since he was in 3 Olympics, while Albright never made the Olympics, and Kawada was a national champion in high school and turned pro at a young age. It was a dead match until Kawada was in with Williams, and the two got so excited against each other that they even missed some spots, but just before the crowd could laugh, Williams dropped Kawada on his head with a brainbuster which stunned everyone. Kawada sold it as if he was knocked out. It picked up from that point, ending when Williams pinned Honda with the Dr. Bomb. 2 stars. 4. Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Asako beat Yoshinari Ogawa and Tao and Shiga. Misawa and Tao were building up for their title match, so it was great when they were in with each other. The fans didn't buy Shiga on offense against the top guys early, but they got into him as he was getting pounded on. There was a huge pop when he kicked out of a stiff clothesline by Akiyama. After being saved after Akiyama delivered a Northern Light suplex, Shiga was pinned after Akiyama's urinage suplex. Hot main event. 3 stars 3/4. May 25th, New Japan. 1. Riki Choshu and Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Nishimura and Takashi Iizuka beat Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara and Akitoshi Saito and Akira Nagami at 11:09 when Choshu pinned Nagami after a lariat. 2.25 stars. 2. Yuji Nagata and Tokumitsu Ishizawa beat Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto in 11:20 when Nagata shockingly pinned Kanemoto with a belly-to-belly superplex. Nagata has improved so much that he's already one of the top wrestlers in the world now, and these are his perfect opponents. Lots of super stiff offense. It's very hard to have a less than great tag match against Otani and Kanemoto. Most of the match was great, but there were missed moves in there as well. 3.5 stars. 3. Shinya Hashimoto made Nagata submit in 7:40 with a crooked head scissors after a high-angle DDT. Hard slaps and kicks going back and forth. A really great and brutal match with both playing their roles perfectly, Hashimoto as the world champion who isn't afraid to get messy, and Nagata as the future superstar who gives the champ more trouble than he should before losing. Maybe a tad short is the only problem. 3.5 stars. 4. Kazuo Yamazaki made Ishizawa submit to a knee bar in 9 minutes. This match played to the strength of both men since they were working submissions on the mat, and Yamazaki also did his strong kicks. Ishizawa does a submission master gimmick since he's got Brazilian training and is Inoki's protege. A very interesting modern strong style match with a very realistic feel. 3.5 stars. 5. Koshinaka and Tatsutoshi Goto beat Chono and Tenzan in 13:26. Finish saw Akitoshi Saito interfere and knock Tenzan off the top rope, and Goto then used a clothesline for the surprise pin on Chono. Some parts had good heat and there was some outside interference back and forth by the high members and also by Hiro Saito. There was some brawling in the crowd, but it was nowhere close to ECW caliber wildness. Goto looked pretty bad in spots. At one point he did a wind sprint clothesline which looked more like a slow jog clothesline. 2 stars. May 26, All Japan. 1. Misawa and Akiyama won the tag team titles from Kawada and Tao. This was flawless, the best match I've seen so far in 1996. A classic as far as psychology and telling a story with one hot move after another with the crowd popping for everything. Everything in the match had meaning as far as building a match storyline, but they also used all the hot moves of the present, fitting in dives, signature moves, near falls and last second saves. The surprise finish didn't hurt either. The early part of the match saw Akiyama destroy Tao and Kawada to get him over as belonging in this title match. Misawa tagged in and was back suplexed on his head and he sold for a while. The only negative was that about 5 minutes in various places had to be edited out because the match was longer than the TV time. Since there was no wasted moments in what aired, that probably means it would have only been better unedited. Once again, Akiyama was the best of the four, although the match was designed for him to look that way since he was the one who didn't belong in the tag title match. The end of the match saw Akiyama deliver one great suplex after another, a German and 3 urinages, and shockingly pin Kawada for the first time in a major match. 5 stars. EMLL. The June 7th show at Arena Coliseum was headlined by Dandy vs. Negro Casas in a singles match and a tag team tournament, where a major star would team with a younger wrestler. Don't know the results of the main, but the tournament came down to Bestia Salvaje and Chicago Express beating Atlantis and Atlantico. Catching up on other major results from the past few weeks at Arena Coliseum, on May 31st, Rayo de Jalisco Jr. retained his CMLL heavyweight title beating Apollo Dantes, and they also had a 6-man with Dandy and Dos Caras and Lizmark beating Casas and Chicago Express and Salvaje with an angle to set up Dandy vs. Casas. On May 21st at Arena Coliseum, Dr. Wagner Jr. retained his CMLL light heavyweight title beating Dos Caras clean in the 3rd fall. Female star Lady Apache divorced Gran Apache last year and is now living with Brazo de Oro, and she has a baby girl, Kaori Alvarado. Mascara Sagrada said the main reason he left AAA was because he was so mad that they created Mascara Sagrada Jr. Mascara de Sagrada, who jumped back to EMLL once again, said he was mad at AAA's creation of Mascara de Sagrada Jr., who used to be Baby Rabbit. AAA this past week debuted a new Mascara Sagrada, who was a wrestler from Naucalpan named Cranio, who I'm told was better than the original. Also jumping back from AAA is MS1 Jr., who had a different gimmick with AAA, and it is expected that Lizmark Jr., who has been out of action for nearly 18 months after breaking his leg, will return in a few weeks. Apparently the May 10th show at Arena Coliseum, which included the return of Vampiro and Connect, drew a legit sellout of 5,500. AAA. The lineup for the June 15th Triple Mania in Orizaba was completely changed, with the new card consisting of a lumberjack strap match with Octagon and La Parca, and the new Mascara Sagrada vs. Cien Cars and Killer and Heavy Metal, a 4 corners match with Conan and Pero Aguayo, Pierroth Jr., and Psicosis, Ultimo Dragon and Pantera and Villano 4 and Pimpinela Escarlata, Latin Lover and Sergio Romo Jr. and Antifaz vs. Jerry Estrada and Sanguinario and Arandu, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Winners and Super Calo and Oro Jr. vs. Juventud Guerrera and Perros Silva and Halloween and Damien, and Los Cadetes de Espacio vs. Ravana and Black Cat 2 and Duende and Espectro and Picudo. The next Tijuana show is June 14th, with Conan defending the AAA Iwas and US title against Pierroth on top, Mysterio Jr. and Sagrada Jr. and Team Yabeles Jr. vs. Payasos, Pantera vs. Psychosis in a lumberjack match and one-night tournament to crown a Latin American champion with Halloween, Genghis Khan, Hijo del Enfermero, Leon Negro, Angel Mensajero, and Thunderbird. Khan's problems with the commission in both Tijuana and Mexicali were settled this past week under the guise that he promises to have no blood and use no foreign objects as weapons on his shows. At the Peace Festival, the reason Antonio Pena walked out during the Negro Casas vs. Hijo del Santo match was because when Santo did a tope on Casas, Casas flew backwards, crashing into Pena. Pena thought it was unprofessional and left, and Eric Bischoff, to show unity since the two groups have a working relationship, left with him. Bischoff was planning on leaving early anyway. Newcomer Hong Kong Lee is washed-up veteran Kato Kung Lee, and he debuted on June 5th in Naucalpan in the main event and looked terrible. Business has been way up this past week as besides a nearly full house in Tijuana on June 2nd, a show in Mexicali on June 3rd drew 5,500 in a 6,000-seat arena with Mil Mascaras and Aguayo working on top, plus the first singles meeting ever of Psychosis vs. Ultimo Dragon. Apparently Aguayo got 10 times the reception of Mascaras, but it should be noted that even with some very strong lineups, Mexicali hasn't drawn more than 2,500 in a while. The same night in Leon drew a sellout 3,500, while June 5th in Naucalpan also drew a sellout in a 2,700-seat arena, and June 4th in Nogales was also sold out. There are yet another set of problems in Tijuana. Promel filed a complaint with the commission. The commission rules are that there can be only one wrestling show per night in the city and that a promotion can advertise its show locally until after the final show in the area takes place in order to avoid confusion in the marketplace. The AAA TV tapings were June 2nd, but Promel ran a show on May 31st, which drew 700, and theoretically that would mean AAA couldn't start advertising its show until June 1st, but they were advertising it before the date, thereby breaking that rule. Tentative plans are for house shows on July 12th in Phoenix and July 13th at the Grand Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. If those shows take place, they would probably be the final AAA shows in the United States until the American television situation is straightened out. In the May 20th match at Nuevo Laredo, which drew the record house, Pimpinela Escarlata retained the Mexican light heavyweight strap against former champ La Parka that he had won on May 13th. The finish saw Jerry Estrada hand Escarlata a Parka mask, which he put on, and then he knocked down ref Pepe Casas, who went down. As he got up, Parka had Escarlata in a submission hold and Casas called for the DQ on Parka for knocking him down in a finish that would make Dusty proud. At the show, local promoters Eduardo Lazaro and Carlos Johnson gave Pena, Parka, Latin Lover and Pimpinela awards for being the biggest sports draws in the city, as in 1996 they are outdrawing both bullfighting and boxing. Pena's magazine, Super Luchas, ran a story on Venom of Los Cadetes de Espacio, who turns 19 next month and is the son of a deceased wrestler known as Black Star. Caught the Galavision show Lucha Lunes, which airs on the West Coast at 10 p.m. Mondays, right after both Raw and the Nitro replay. At least on the show on June 10th, with so much going on Mondays I haven't watched the show more than twice since it debuted in January, which was taped before the Record House on May 20th at Nuevo Laredo. The production was god-awful. The voiceovers were done in studio rather than live, which is no big deal since most WCW and WWF broadcasts are done the same way, but the sound mixing was atrocious. Mexican shows traditionally do the worst job of crowd mixing known to mankind, but in this case, they had the sound from the arena turned 100% off and all you heard were the announcers doing commentary while fans were out of their chairs. Since Nuevo Laredo may be the rowdiest city and it's definitely right now the hottest city on the circuit, going crazy, and the match that I saw was more action-packed and at least looked by visual reactions to have tons more heat than anything on either Raw or Nitro the evening by a big margin. All Japan. The current tour ended on June 7th at Budokan Hall before a sellout 16,300 fans, with a double main event of Akira Tao pinning Toshiaki Kawada in 1741 with a choke slam to retain the Triple Crown, and Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama retained the double tag team titles, beating Steve Williams and Johnny Ace in 30:09 when Akiyama pinned Ace with the Expo Rider Urinagy after Misawa had knocked Ace out with a Tiger Suplex. In the third from the top match, 20-year-old Manukia Mossman, who they are grooming for an eventual top spot, had his biggest match to date, being that high on a major show, teaming with Kenta Kobashi, losing to Giant Kimala 2 and Gary Albright when he was pinned by 2 after the splash. The Tao Kawada match aired on television on June 9th, while the tag title match airs on June 16th. The next tour will be June 29th to July 24th, climaxing at Budokan Hall with Tao defending against Kobashi in the main event. Foreigners on the tour will be Stan Hansen, Steve Williams, Gary Albright, The Patriot, Johnny Ace, Bobby Duncombe Jr., Johnny Smith, Rob Van Dam and Mark and Chris Youngblood. The focus of the tour will be the continued push of Akiyama to the top. Key matches on the tour will be June 30th at Korakuen Hall with Yoshinari Ogawa defending the PWF Junior title against Masafuchi, July 7th in Kyoto with Akiyama and Takao Omori defending the All-Asian Tag titles against Mossman and Van Dam, July 9th in Kanazawa with Misawa and Akiyama defending the double tag titles against Tao and Kawada. Expect the titles to switch back here. July 11th in Hakata with Akiyama vs Kobashi, July 18th in Okayama with Tao vs Akiyama and July 20th in Korakuen Hall with Kawada vs Akiyama plus an Elimination Survivors tag match with the teams of Kentaro Shiga and Masao Inoue and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Ogawa vs Mossman and Satoru Asako and Omori and Tamon Honda. June 2nd TV show did a 2.7 rating. New Japan. The top of the Super Junior tournament wound up with Wild Pegasus and El Samurai tied for the lead in the A block with 4-2 records, with Samurai getting the first place not having beaten Pegasus in their singles match, and Black Tiger winning the B block with a 5-1 record and Jushin Liger and Shinjiro Otani tying for second with 4-2 records. Liger advanced into the semifinals over Otani by beating him on June 4th in Kumamoto. This led to the semifinals on June 11th in Hiroshima with Liger vs Samurai and Tiger vs Pegasus with the winners meeting for the championship on June 12th in Osaka. Overall, the top of the Super Junior tournament didn't seem to garner as much interest or draw the crowds as in years past because of a lack of depth as compared with past years. None of the newcomers Villano 4, Franz Schumann, Jerry Lynn or Emilio Charles Jr. were pushed as threats for the top guys. And while the top guys are 5 or 6 of the top 20 wrestlers in the world, they have no new feuds or storylines and have been facing each other in every tournament for the past few years. In addition, Koji Kanemoto, who would have added to the depth, was injured and missed the entire tournament, while Charles and Lynn, broken shoulder and shoulder separation respectively, were knocked out of action during the tour leading to a lot of forfeit wins. The main event on June 11th in Hiroshima has Shinya Hashimoto defending the IWGP title against Satoshi Kojima, who went 3-0 in the round robin beating Michiyoshi Ohara 2-1, Hiroyoshi Tenzan 1-2 and Osamu Nishimura 0-3, with Kojima over Ohara on June 5th in Beppu to earn the title shot. Kunyaki Kobayashi is also out of action with an injury suffered on June 5th in Beppu in a match against Tokumitsu Ishizawa. Don't know exactly what the injury was, but it must have been serious, as they immediately stopped the match with Kobayashi outside the ring getting counted out, as the mentality in Japan is to deny pain and continue the match, no matter how serious the injury is. Other Japan notes. Satoru Sayama's Valley Tudo promotion has a show on July 7th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall. Among the fighters scheduled to compete are Igor Zinoviev, EFC, against Enson Inoue, a Hawaiian who is considered to be among the top Americans in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, John Lewis, EFC, Don Fry, UFC facing a guy named Don Murphy. This would be just 5 days before the UFC tournament. Orlando Veidt, UFC 2, Nigel Scantlebury, EFC, and Royler Gracie, younger brother of Hoyce and Hickson, and former Pancrase wrestlers Alex Cook and Robert Bjornathan. In addition, AJW wrestler Yumiko Hata, who is 2-1 as legit major shoot matches, will have a Valley Tudo rules match against Margot Neofuto from the Netherlands, who is billed as the European Women's Kickboxing Champion at 160 pounds with a 20-0 record. AJW announced WWWA Champions Night on June 22nd in Sapporo, headlined by Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue vs Manami Toyota and Mima Shimoda for the WWWA Tag Titles in a best-of-3 fall match, a one-night tournament for the vacant All-Pacific title. Hata vacated the title to concentrate on winning in Valley Tudo and the upcoming UFC women's event in August, with the first-round matches being Reggie Bennett, you won't believe how much she's improved over the past 18 months, versus Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito versus Tomoko Watanabe, with the winners facing in the title match later. Shaparita Asari defends the WWWA Super Lightweight title against Ri Tamata plus Asia Kong and Yoshiko Tamura versus Kumiko Maekawa and Hata. Yoshida got the biggest win of her career on June 8th in Gunma, pinning Kong in a singles match. AJW ran Korakuen Hall on June 9th, drawing a sellout 1,950 with Tamata and Kyoko Inoue and Kong over Asari and Yoshida and Toyota, with Inoue pinning Yoshida with a German suplex in 24:05 on top. Big Japan Pro Wrestling's next tour will be July 19th to August 8th all over Japan, using the latest terrible Ted the Wrestling Bear as the headliner. Also on the tour will be Mr. Pogo, Shoji Nakamaki, Jason Knight, former ECW manager, and Bull Payne. IWA ran a tour from June 4th to June 8th with the Black Hearts, David Heath and, managed by Luna Vachon, Vampiro Casanova, EMLO's former top draw Silver Jason, Steel Leather, Eddie Watts, and Leatherface, Rick Patterson, along with EMLL minis Felinito and Orito. Cactus Jack appeared in, we've said this before and it never seems to be the case, his final match under that ring name on June 4th at Korakuen Hall in an 8-man tag. The entire tour drew poorly, including Korakuen, which was only about half full, 900 fans. So this group may be running into problems. They have officially canceled their August Kawasaki Baseball Stadium show and are apparently trying to work a deal with Paul Heyman to book foreign talent from ECW to save the ship. Sabu will debut for Tokyo Pro Wrestling on June 24th on the undercard of the Abdullah the Butcher vs. Mr. Pogo loser leaves town match. Sabu will feud in TPW with a mysterious wrestler known only as Ozuma. I believe it'll be Too Cold Scorpio, with a She claims Sabu is feuding within the US UWFI and War ran a combined show on June 7th in Sapporo before 4,000 with Geto and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki regaining the War 6-man titles they had lost on May 26th to the Golden Cups. During the match, Anjo, who has become the master of unique foreign objects in his role as a media-created top heel, pulled a live octopus out of a bucket and hung Fuyuki with the octopus legs. Fuyuki wound up making a comeback and beat Yamamoto with a figure 4 to take the belts back in 2053. A rematch is set for June 15th in Hakata with Anjo, who in recent weeks has used chopsticks, eggs, and an octopus, threatening to debut yet another gimmick in that match. Takada beat Arashi in the semi. Neither Tatsuo Nakano nor Kiyoshi Tamura appeared at the show, both instead were photographed at a kickboxing event at Korakuen Hall. Nakano quit the group, although it may be an angle, and Tamura is still under contract to the group but is expected to leave when his contract expires. FMW's next tour will be June 17th to June 28th, with the tour ending at Korakuen Hall to crown as new independent world heavyweight champion. The only first-round match that has taken place saw Masato Tanaka upset Mr. Pogo. The other first-round matches as Horace Boulder vs. Hisakatsu Oya, Koji Nakagawa vs. Wing Kanemura, and Haido vs. Super Leather. USWA. As expected, Cyberpunk Ice dropped the fall on June 5th in Helena, Arkansas, and the loser of the Fall Leaves Town Tag Team title match with Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee vs. Cyberpunks. However, in a surprise, on the June 8th live television show, Dundee also lost to Loser Leaves Town in a singles match against Cyberpunk Fire, which set up a Lawler vs. Fire match on June 10th at the Mid-South Coliseum, where Fire would leave town if he lost. Odds of moving away from the Coliseum to the local flea market have increased. The June 8th TV show was one of the strongest shows in months, and we'll see how that affects the June 10th Coliseum show, which is the first card in 3 weeks. TV opened with them announcing a title match with Jeff Jarrett versus Brian Christopher, and that Frank Morel and Tony Falk would both be banned from ringside. However, Jarrett brought out Patricia, who also works ECW as the Meanie Babe, Take Off on Booty Babe. Flex Cabana and Doug Gilbert and Bart Sawyer worked a 6-man match on TV, and Cabana even did a dive out of the ring. Ronnie P. Gossett sent in a taped interview. He's added at least 2 chins since the last time he worked the territory. The Dundee vs. Fire loser leaves town match ended when Lawler held up a stool for Dundee to throw Fire into. Fire reversed it. Dundee went into the stool and was pinned. Lawler after the match complained, saying the result was a tragedy, and challenged Fire to a match where if Fire lost, he'd leave town, putting up $1,000. Fire turned him down. Lawler put up $2,500. Fire turned him down, and finally Lawler put up $5,000 and Fire accepted. In the TV main for the title, Christopher brought out Miss Texas to ringside to counteract Patricia. The two chased each other around the ring. At one point Texas tripped Jarrett. At that point the heel fan who has been in the stands the past few weeks jumped on Texas, and they had him arrested. Texas said she wanted a match with him and Randy Hales said no. Texas said that Hales is supposed to make the matches the fans want to see and asked the fans if they wanted to see that match, and of course they responded positively. Jarrett vs. Christopher ended without a finish. June 10th complete card was Bart Sawyer vs. Sir Mo, Cabana vs. Ashley Hudson, Texas vs. the fan whose name is fair and square and he's wrestled some of the small Tennessee indies, Lawler vs. Fire, Gilbert vs. King Mabel, with the winner to be first in line for a shot at Jarrett's title, Christopher defending the USWA title against the Punisher, Jarrett vs. Jesse James Armstrong with the title put up against Armstrong leaving town. He's scheduled to go to Otto Wan's country, and the main event is a battle royal with 4 concession stands put up at ringside, and the winner will become the first USWA concession stand champion. Hales tried to explain this ridiculous concept by saying that the fans want more brawling outside the ring and it's their job to give the fans what they want, so they are creating a concession stand championship. ECW. The only show of the weekend was June 8 in Reading, Pennsylvania, before about 250 fans in a show described as kind of a nothing B show, hurt by the fact the building was ungodly hot inside. Main results saw Eliminators beat Gangstas to keep the tag titles, Raven over Sandman to keep the ECW title in 252 when Stevie Richards interfered, Brian Lee pinned Tommy Dreamer when the Bruise Brothers interfered, Pitbull No. 2 kept the TV title beating Shane Douglas due to outside interference of Too Cold Scorpio, Taz destroyed Devon Storm in 1:25 and Paul Verlins debuted and KO'd Jason Helton in about 20 seconds with an elbow to the top of the head. Sabu was scheduled to wrestle Storm but missed the show and they announced it was because he missed his flight in from Chicago. The biggest pop of the show came in an undercard match when Devon Dudley hit Bubba Ray Dudley with a chair and Big Dick Dudley made the save. New Jack worked an indie show for former ECW valet Angel on June 9 in Philadelphia against the wishes of Paul Heyman. As far as the situation last week in Philadelphia regarding New Jack and Brian Pillman, Heyman said that Pillman shouldn't have used the word, New Jack shouldn't have overreacted to Pillman, and that he also made a mistake in that he shouldn't have let New Jack do the interview, which had nothing to do with business. New Jack demanded the interview or threatened not to work the main event, and he said killed the rest of the show since he went on for something like 12 minutes. Rupert Murdoch has purchased Liberty Media, which runs Prime Cable, which is going to be restructured to eventually become Fox Sports Network. How this affects ECW and WCW, which are both on Prime in some markets, is unknown. Some notes from the June 4 television show. The spot where we reported that Brian Lee choke slammed Tommy Dreamer through 3 tables, it was actually 2 tables, although a 3rd table was set up nearby. About a minute earlier, Dreamer had done a splash off the stage onto Lee through a table. The Taz vs. Jason Helton match was billed as a shoot fight with Helton, who is a former wrestler for Stampede Wrestling, billed as a Muay Thai fighter from Phoenix. Helton's elbow blows and kicks looked bad for something that was supposed to be a shoot. The post-match angle with Paul Verlins had a lot of heat. Taz was tremendous in building heat on the mic while Verlins kept getting dragged away. Helton, with a short haircut, had a resemblance to a Gracie. Some might think doing all this shoot-fighting gimmick stuff with Taz is silly, but it is the way Antonio Inoki got over in Japan as the most enduring legend of our generation. IWA and Booker Akio Sato are close to putting together a deal where several of the top ECW names, including Heyman, will be working dates in Japan on August 10th and August 11th. The Divine Brown angle wasn't quite as bad as it read. She came into the ring and tripped on her heels and left through the segment and never hit her line. However, Richards did a tremendous job in saving the segment and the way it was shot. You couldn't see Brown's face as she was laughing her way through the angle. Her appearance did generate 3 paragraphs in the gossip section of the June 7 New York Daily News, with them saying Divine came to them promising to be more hardcore with Raven than she ever was with Hugh Grant. I believe that was the line she was supposed to hit when she laughed her way through the deal. Scorpio was in the hospital until June 6 because his fever was dangerously high from the staph infection. Referee Paul Richards and Mike Beninsky are promoting holiday weekend ECW shows at Champs Arena, which is on the beach in Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts, on both July 5 and July 6, about 45 minutes out of Boston. The building only seats 500, so if you have no vacation plans and want to head there and see 2 ECW shows, you should make reservations in advance at 508-462-1279. Among the matches will be Raven vs. Sandman, Shane Douglas vs. Scorpio for the TV title, which I guess tells you one or the other will be winning it soon. Eliminators vs. Gangstas, all weapons legal with Lee vs. Dreamer. Here and there. Actual attendance at the World Wrestling Peace Festival was 5,964. I incorrectly misinterpreted the number of comps as being about 1,500 less than it actually was, although in no way did it look like there were anywhere close to 6,000 in the building, but that is a legit figure. The show got huge coverage in this week's Gone, with the 4 main eventers getting the cover and the show getting the first 8 pages of the mag, first 5 pages on the main event and 1 page on Liger Sasuke, half page on the Mysterio Jr. and Dragon match, half page on the women's match, and 1 photo each of Sting Giant, Fujinami Cat Benoit Wright and the Triangle match. I can't even remember the last time that kind of space and the cover has been devoted to a US wrestling show in recent memory. The UFC show where Gracie headlined against Shamrock and Severn won the tournament was the last US show to get a cover and be the lead story. Weekly Pro, which is still at war with New Japan, had no photo coverage of the show. A correction from the Peace Festival story in regard to the Triangle match. We reported it was the first time Conan, Bam Bam Bigelow and Chris Jericho had ever worked with one another. Actually, Bigelow and Jericho did work against one another during a 6-man tournament for war. Penthouse has a story on Ralph Gracie in the current issue and has a story scheduled for the August issue on the entire EFC situation in Quebec. At the Peach State Wrestling Show on June 7 in Cordell, Georgia before 470 fans, besides the Pillman interview, Terry Taylor beat Billy Black via DQ in what was reported as a very good match for Black City Championship. After the match, Rob Van Dam attacked Black to set up a loser leaves town match on the next show, although the date wasn't announced. Rock and Roll Express beat Rex King and Steve Dahl, the former Well Done tag team. PG-13 worked shows for Dennis Corraluzzo and Angel Amoroso in the Philadelphia area over the weekend and looked real good. At the June 8 show in Yardville, New Jersey before a sellout 600, Jim Cornette managed PG-13 against Ace Darling and Inferno Kid. Cornette also managed Corraluzzo in a boxing match against Tommy Firo, which was said to be among the worst travesties of modern times. Jeff Osborne will be running his second shoot show on August 31 in Evansville, Indiana with several Pancrase rules matches. The Channel America Wrestling block has moved from 11 p.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. If anyone can find the Saturday Night Wrestling television show from Mexico City, let us know because plenty of people are searching in vain for it every week. Iwaz and John Arezzi have a show on June 15 in Joplin, Missouri with Bam Bam Bigelow, Tito Santana, Jimmy Snuka, Honky Tonk Man, Greg Valentine, Bob Orton, and Ron Powers. Rich Turksani of 40 Ferndale Avenue, Stratford, Connecticut 06497 is looking at booking indie talent for shows in Southern Connecticut and New England, so those interested can send photos or videos. IWA Hardcore Wrestling ran a tour of Manitoba this past week, including doing 2 nights of television tapings using, among others, Timothy Flowers, Ultimo Dragon, Jerry Morrow, Johnny Smith, Big Titan, Lance Storm, Bad News Allen, Chris Jericho, as a heel, Dr. Luther, The Natural, Doink the Clown, and Gama Singh. Apparently Dragon got over strong as a babyface and Luther, doing his FMW routine, got over as a cult figure. A group called Niagara Falls Championship Wrestling has a show on June 23. UFC Semaphore Entertainment Group is drafting legislation in New York to get UFC approved and regulated by the New York State Athletic Commission, which would eliminate any chance of anything coming out of the woodwork to stop the Syracuse show in September. Along with that would end a lot of the criticism of the event because the second largest state and most influential athletic commission in the country will have approved it, likely leading some others to follow in line, and it would remove the stigma opponents' pain of UFC as running away from states with commissions. There were court hearings that started on June 7 in Rhode Island as local politicians are attempting to get an injunction banning the July 12 show. As of press time, the results of the hearings weren't released. Added to the July 12 tournament is Mark Coleman, a former NCAA champion wrestler. Tom Erickson, who has placed as high as second in the World Championships in freestyle, lost on June 8 to Bruce Baumgartner in the match to determine who would represent the U.S. in the Olympics as the freestyle heavyweight. Erickson's main holdup in taking the UFC was that if he were to beat Baumgartner, which would have been considered a monumental upset since Baumgartner hasn't lost to an American in something like 15 years, he'd have made the Olympic team and wouldn't have done UFC. However, he was injured in the match. The other spot is being left open as they are negotiating to bring another jiu-jitsu name in from Brazil, Ricardo Moraes. Viewers' Choice Canada will once again not carry the upcoming UFC, which is a huge blow as it cuts a solid 10 to 20% of gross revenue out ahead of time. Dan Severn was interviewed this past weekend for a story on the George Michael Sports Machine, WCW. Nitro on June 10 in Wheeling, West Virginia drew $3,541,000 for the best of the 2 hours shows to date, although that is faint praise considering the first 2 episodes. As always, the highlight was the angle at the end of the show where Kevin Nash debuted with Scott Hall, dressed exactly like Diesel, with the two basically running down WCW saying how boring the TV show had been and challenged 3 of the WCW fossils, bringing up Hogan, Savage and Sting, and made a remark about getting 3 of the guys off of kidney dialysis, which are basically remarks about the WCW top guys being old and plagued by the results of a lifetime of steroids and inside lingo, so the commentary was pretty heavy. It was another great segment. The show also had 2 good matches out of the 8, with a solid opener with Scott Steiner pinning Booker T in 5:53 with a belly-to-belly 2 3/4 stars, and a good finale with Sting and Lex Luger retaining the tag titles, going to a no contest with Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson in 1834 when Giant interfered going after Luger, and it took Sting, Luger, and Scott Steiner, all with chairs, to keep Giant at bay. It did a great job of getting Giant over as a monster. The match was real good since Sting worked 85% of the match and Flair and Anderson were motivated, but it isn't like it seemed like deja vu from start to finish, including the run-in finish at the end. In between wasn't so good, featuring a totally lame angle where Deborah McMichael went into Flair's dressing room, came out screaming, and Flair and Anderson destroyed Joe Gomez and Renegade, their scheduled opponents for later in the show. It happened too fast and was really bad. Michael did an interview earlier saying she wanted the match stopped because Steve was so mad she was afraid someone would get seriously hurt and she didn't want it happening on her behalf. Other Nitro results saw Dallas Page over-debuting Jim Powers with the Diamond Cutter in 4:04, 1 star. Sting beat Meng with a Scorpion in 3:09, 3/4 of a star. Jim Duggan pinned David Taylor after taping his fist and hitting him in 2:25, -half star. Giant kept the title pinning Scott Norton after a choke slam on the floor in 1:42, half star. Steve Regal beat Billy Kidman in 57 with a combination Boston Crab and Stump Puller, BUD, and in a totally horrible match filled with mistimed spots, Public Enemy beat Nasty Boys via DQ in 11:30 when Sags hit Rocco with a garbage can as he was on the top rope, 1 star. Grunge was working with a cast on his arm as he apparently broke it the previous night in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. That gives him an excuse. I don't know what the excuse for the other 3 was, but it was like watching the worst of indie workers. I think they are going to keep the identity of the third member of the Nash and Hall team a secret until the July 7th show. There are things that lead me to believe it may not be Lex Luger after all, which is a mistake. Rumors are flying it'll be Jeff Jarrett since Vince McMahon on the WWF hotline brought up Jarrett's name with Diesel and Ramon as expecting him to join WCW. Jarrett gave notice to Titan and is working out his notice in USWA and he is WCW bound. However, his WWF contract doesn't expire until the fall, so it probably won't be him. The WCW team will be Sting and Savage and either Flair or Luger. Surprisingly, WCW drew its weakest ratings, so whatever mainstream curiosity there was regarding Kevin Nash meant nothing in the ratings. Raw drew a 2.7 and a 4.4 share, while Nitro did a 2.6 and a 4.4 share, 2.5 first hour, 2.6 seconds hour, and the Nitro replay did a 1.4 and a 3.3, so that figure was up. Other weekend numbers saw Saturday Night do a 2.0, Main Event a 2.0 and Pro a 1.0. Expect Harlem Heat to get a renewed push in a few weeks. There is heat with Pierre Ouellette and Jacques Rougeau, who are scheduled to start in July. Apparently the Quebecers are upset because they believe WCW hasn't been giving them the support in agreeing to do a large stadium show in Montreal. WCW doesn't want to take the risk of running in a 60,000-seat building in a market they have no history in. Rougeau has been wanting to do a show at the stadium ever since he sold out the Forum for his retirement show in 1994, and the WWF nixing doing a show at the stadium was the prime reason for his split with the WWF. WCW has expressed interest in Scott Levy, Raven, to join forces with Dallas Page. Apparently that was the reason Page went to an ECW show last week, was to talk Levy into coming to WCW. It was amazing on WCW Saturday Night when the Steiners, Norton and Ice Train did an interview. Train's arms are so huge they actually make Norton and Rick Steiner look small and even dwarf Scott's bowling ball biceps. Speaking of Scott, if you're wondering how he looks the way he does, it's because he has great genetics. Also, guys who haven't signed contracts, which the Steiners haven't, don't get tested. As for the guys who have signed contracts that are so big and ripped at the same time nowadays in comparison with the WWF guys, I guess WCW simply draws its wrestlers from a more gifted gene pool. And if you ask why when those same guys were in WWF they were smaller, I guess some guys in their late 30s and early 40s can actually make great improvements in their physique through cultivating their enormous genetic potential, which they were unable to do in WWF because they weren't as happy. If you buy that, I feel sorry for you. Besides Buffalo, house shows over the weekend were June 8th in Youngstown, Ohio, drawing $2,620 and $32,535. We don't at press time have reports from June 9th in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, but that is usually not a good drawing city for wrestling. WCW's Saturday night taping was on June 5th in Rome, Georgia, before 2,400 fans, 1,800 paying $14,800, with Pat Tanaka debuting as El Gato, a supposed South American legend wearing a Felino costume. Fire and Ice double count out Steiners to set up the pay-per-view must be a winner match. Luger beat David Taylor and Sting beat Hugh Morris. Regal's interviews have been great of late. For the week ending May 19th, all WCW programming combined was viewed in 4.97 million homes on 183 stations and cable, while all WWF programming was viewed in 4.49 million homes on 163 stations and cable. For May 26th it was neck and neck within 4.40 million homes, with WCW on 182 stations and WWF on 159. The reason the numbers were closer than usual those weeks is because those were weeks with Nitro being moved earlier because of the NBA and Raw going unopposed. An Observer subscriber is one of the execs producing the movie The Giant was filming in Oregon with Reggie White, Pat Morita, Rosie Greer, et al. They convinced the director to reshoot the Giant's fight scenes to use more pro wrestling spots. Latest figures have the Slamboree pay-per-view show doing in 0.44 buy rate, 108,000 buys, est. $1.21 million company revenue. There was no mention whatsoever of the Buffalo show and the strong crowd on the June 10th Nitro show. WWF. Besides Brian Pillman, Vince McMahon has either come close to or has completed a deal with Ron Simmons, who is expected to debut as a heel at the next TV tapings on June 24th and June 25th. McMahon met with Simmons at his home in Georgia after the last set of tapings. Also expected to debut at those tapings include Jim Neidhart with a new gimmick, and Tracy Smothers, Tony Anthony, Alex Porto, Tom Brandi, and Bill Irwin, all repackaged with new gimmicks. The latter five are being brought in just for television, to be given a new gimmick, a few wins, and then used to put over the top babyface without sacrificing so many heels on TV. There is a chance they could get regular work if the gimmick gets over, but they aren't being brought in with the idea of any of them getting a big push. Brandi, Johnny Gunn, is expected to be called Sylvester Sincerely, and have a Don Juan Hill gimmick. McMahon and Davey Boy Smith had their meeting on June 6th at the offices. Smith apparently told McMahon that he had a big money deal proposed by WCW but also talked of wanting to stay. McMahon apparently told Smith WWF never planned on doing anything with the angle to embarrass his family and that problem was supposedly taken care of. At this point Smith hasn't agreed to stay, but WWF people think the odds of him leaving are lower than they felt with Kevin Nash, Ted DiBiase and Scott Hall at similar periods. Bret Hart's return has been pushed back to well past SummerSlam and perhaps as long as Survivor Series, although no specific date has been agreed upon. There will be no more European tours this year for fear of burning out the market. The only foreign tours on the books are a September 7th to September 15th tour of South Africa, and a late November/early December tour of Singapore, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and Australia. Bob Holly hasn't given indication that he's leaving imminently, but is out of action with an ankle injury. Yokozuna is booked through the end of this month but will be given a lot of time off after the end of the month to get his weight problems under control. They did an interview to start a storyline of him being gone after losing to Owen Hart on Raw where he was despondent and said he wasn't himself anymore. The Bodydonna's new manager will debut at an NWA indie show on June 14th in West Deptford, New Jersey. The only thing I've heard is that it will be a man dressed up like a woman to feud with Sunny. The most likely scenario for King of the Ring is that Steve Austin will beat Jake Roberts in the finals. I'd say chances of Vader winning are slim if not at all. They announced on Raw that Jim Cornette had a guest ref picked for the Shawn Michaels Smith title match for King of the Ring. Haven't heard but most are figuring it'll be Kurt Hennig with the other possible choice being Owen Hart. If it's Hart, expect it to lead into Ahmed Johnson being involved in the top angle. Speaking of Milwaukee, it is officially sold out. 8,572 tickets and $139,098, more than 2 weeks in advance. McMahon attended the Chicago show since there was such a big house expected. Shawn Michaels was on the radio in Chicago building up the card, and when the subject of Flair and Hogan were brought up, Michaels said that his idol at one time was Flair but also said that some people don't know when it's time to quit. Weekend houses were June 6th in Rockford, Illinois drew $3,611 and $58,789. June 7th in Peoria, Illinois drew $3,572 and $53,764 and June 8th in Moline, Illinois drew $3,186 and $51,250. Rockford was the best WWF house since 1991, Peoria was the best since 1987 and Moline was the best wrestling house ever. The top matches saw Michaels beat Goldust with the Superkick. Reports ranged from 1 3/4 stars to 3 1/2 stars. Undertaker over Mankind, said to be better than expected. Warrior over Vader in either 1-minute quickies or in Chicago, winning via a lame core after a longer but equally awful match. Pretty much duds across the board. In Chicago, Davey Boy Smith beat Ahmed Johnson via countout when Johnson chased after Goldust, but they did DQ finishes in the other cities. Steve Austin beat Jake Roberts in Chicago, but Jake was put over in the other cities. The gates this weekend with Goldust on top and a cold angle have to establish that gimmick as a major success, even though if you want to examine things too closely, you'd note that the largest gap on June 3rd between Nitro and Raw in Nitro's favor came while Goldust was delivering that interview with the belt over his private parts. They had a couple of segments with Jake Roberts talking about his cocaine and alcohol problems of the past, claiming he nearly died from them on several occasions. On Superstars, They tried to hint the problems came from despondency after losing to Undertaker and leaving the WWF in 1992, but on Action Zone it was pretty well admitted Roberts was having the problems throughout his WWF tenure. Oz interview, which was similar to the Bret Hart deal in that it was produced to be a shoot, and no doubt was close to it in some aspects, will be continued next week. The stories about Sonny being the most downloaded celebrity and Warrior having the #1 comic book in the world are all hype. I saw a list of the top 10 downloaded celebrity and Sonny wasn't on the list. Pam Anderson Lee and Jenny McCarthy types dominate. The Warrior book is an even bigger work and most major comic book stores don't even carry it, and it isn't even produced by a major distributor. The Beware of Dog pay-per-view did about an 0.45 buy rate going in, which would be 110,000 buys, although that's not taking into account refunds factored in from the show being screwed up by the power outage, many of which will be unknown for a while because people will simply complain to the companies when the bills for may come in several weeks. Semaphore Entertainment Group, in situations where the conclusion of the main event didn't air in some markets because the show lasted longer than 3 hours, wound up having to refund 10% and 30% of revenue respectively when all was said and done on the two shows. Since this show had 3 of the 5 bouts missing, UFC offered complete shows on replays as well and still incurred major givebacks. Rather than simply one finish, one has to figure the percentage asking for refunds will be much higher. McMahon once again on Superstars over the weekend talked of Diesel and Razor Ramon trying to portray themselves as the stars they once were in another organization and pointing out neither works for the WWF and that they are under contract to that rival organization. Brad Radford, Louis Mucciolo, was given his unconditional release rather than the expected conditional release. Obviously they either don't believe WCW would use him or don't care if they do. He's expected to start with ECW shortly, as he had an ECW start date held back because WWF wouldn't allow him to appear on the shows until he asked for his WWF release. On the June 10th Raw main event, Bulldog beat Undertaker via countout. It had been reported in The Observer 2 weeks back that it was a double countout. Besides Raw, the other weekend numbers saw Action Zone at 1.5 and Mania at 1.2. The readers' pages. Peace Festival. The attendance at the World Wrestling Peace Festival was one of the most pathetic things I've ever seen. I think the low turnout can be attributed to many things. First, there are many people in this city, especially on the west side, that are hesitant to go to either the sports arena or the Coliseum because of the area they are in. This has been an issue for as long as I can remember in this city. It is a fact the sports arena is not in the best part of town, and that alone played a part in people staying home. Furthermore, when compared to the Arrowhead Pond or even the Forum, the sports arena looks like it was built in the 1850s rather than the 1950s. Finally, there are many other things to do in Los Angeles on a Saturday night rather than attend pro wrestling, no matter how good a show it is. Los Angeles and North Korea are different places to say the least. Holding this card at a modern arena where people aren't afraid to go would have probably helped the turnout. For the most part, the fans there were very knowledgeable. The inevitable chance of Bischoff sucks. ECW and We Want Blood, by now all as creative at a non-ECW event as a politician wearing a blue suit, were started but all quickly died out. I found it interesting that during the Jushin Liger Great Sasuke match, some fans started yelling for high spots as soon as the bell rang, thus wanting to skip what I see as the best part of any great match. While this was the best match on the card, it was made better by the fact they didn't jump to the high-flying aerial stuff right off. By starting with mat wrestling, building to submissions and then gradually working up to the finish with a series of big moves, Liger and Sasuke showed why New Japan style is the most entertaining wrestling in the world. As for the matches, there were few surprises. Craig Pittman vs. KGB and Jim Neidhart vs. Bobby Bradley were thankfully short. Akira Hokuto and Lady Apache vs. Bull Nakano and Netley was better than I thought it would be. Alex Wright vs. Chris Benoit and Sting vs. Giant are just matches you can see on television. Lex Luger barely worked up a sweat in his match with Masa Saito. The triangle match was a disappointment not because it was a bad match, but because of what it could have been. El Hijo del Santo barely broke a sweat. The EMLL six-man was slow except when Silver King and Atlantis worked together. I was glad to see Tatsumi Fujinami before he retires, and Black Cat looked good. The best matches of the night were the 2 AAA matches, which generated tons of heat. The AAA wrestlers worked the crowd better than any other wrestlers in the world. As for the main event, it would have been better breaking them into 2 singles matches, especially since most of the matches were so short since it was a 14-match card. Personally, I'd have liked to have seen an Inuki vs. Severn main event. New Japan, the Mexican promotions, and WCW had any souvenirs there, which I would imagine is a political deal. Also, at the start of Liger's match, some of the pyro ignited on the tape that was holding them on the ring post directly in front of where I was sitting. As a result, I and everyone around me got a nice blast of whatever is in fire extinguishers in our noses and mouths. I'd like to thank Antonio Inoki, Seiji Sakaguchi, Antonio Pena, Steve Nakata and Eric Bischoff for pulling it together and giving true hardcore fans a night of outstanding wrestling and showcasing wrestling styles from all over the world. Hopefully in the future, WWF, ECW and all other promotions will see fit to participate. And one more thing to all the people who were chanting Bischoff sucks. He may, but he was there supporting the event and went out front and took the abuse from the fans. That's more than can be said for Vince McMahon. Sean Flanagan. Los Angeles, California. I would say the World Wrestling Peace Festival was a huge success, at least as far as the show was concerned. I considered it an honor to witness live some of the great wrestlers from New Japan. The crowd was into every match, but the crowd was obviously a big disappointment. The advertising was almost non-existent. There were TV commercials during Raw, but the typical WWF fan doesn't have a clue about other wrestling except WCW. Despite the small crowd, the wrestlers worked hard and came to impress people. And to add to the spirit of the event, most shook hands with their opponents after their matches, except the wrestlers from WCW. This show would have been just as good, if not better, without WCW. The Giant, Sting, Craig Pittman and especially Lex Luger looked totally out of place. The only advantage of having WCW there was the appearance of Eric Bischoff at ringside. This enables many disgruntled fans to express their feelings at him, and there was no way he couldn't have heard all the comments directed at him. The best matches involved the Mexican wrestlers. Even Pero Aguayo, at his age and physical condition, worked hard. It was no surprise that El Hijo del Santo and Negro Casas had a great match, but the clean finish was a major surprise. The Mexican women didn't hold back Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto from having an exciting match. It wasn't the typical AJW match, but it was an excellent match nonetheless. The best match had to be Rey Mysterio Jr. and Ultimo Dragon vs. Heavy Metal and Psicosis. Mysterio Jr. stands to make huge money in both Japan and the United States if he doesn't cripple himself. Hopefully the guidance of Ultimo Dragon will prolong his career. I really hope this becomes an annual event and returns to the United States. Unfortunately, Los Angeles just isn't a wrestling city like Tokyo or Mexico City. Without the participation of the WWF, this wouldn't work in the Northeast. Federico Garcia.